Today we've got a great malicious compliance story when somebody was told to dress up for a real sleazy event. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, they said meetings were mandatory even when sick, so I joined with my camera on, flu and all. My manager sent out a reminder that all meetings were mandatory even if we were sick, camera on too, so when I came down with a flu, I still logged in like they wanted. I turned my camera on, red nose, pale face, watery eyes, wrapped in blanket. I coughed through most of it. The looks on their faces said it all. Nobody wanted to see that. Funny enough, nobody mentioned the camera rule after that. So it turns out disgust is a very powerful thing. That said, it shouldn't take disgust and discomfort for them to realize you should be allowed to turn your camera off if you're not doing too well. And I gotta be honest, I'm already kind of skeeved out at the idea of any place that's like, you have to have your camera on all times. That P46A commented, if I were in your situation, I would have faked barfing into my trash can multiple times, just off camera but with a microphone on. That would be awesome. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy malicious compliance stories, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? Our next story is, rules are rules unless you don't like them. Office edition. Worked in a pretty low-key, chill office of about 5, mostly younger women with younger children. That's kinda irrelevant. I asked if they would drop mail at the post office or make a bank deposit on the way to or from lunch. They always went out. Both were on the way to or from lunch. I told them to take an extra 15 minutes or so as needed, so not to have them rush their lunchtime. So new woman starts and her and another person come to me and tell me that under Fair Labor Act and various other rules and requirements, they are to be additionally compensated, get mileage for vehicle use and so forth. And rules are rules and they're there for a reason. Yeah, they were probably correct on that point. I removed the ask that they go to the bank and such. Now, some days later, one of the staff come to me and say that they'll be about half an hour late on such and such day as their kid has to be dropped off for something. No problem, I tell her, but she might as well just come in at noon. Why, she asks. Well, rules are rules and policy manual, the same one they quoted to me, states if they're more than 15 minutes late, PTO must be taken. A second policy, same manual, requires PTO to be taken in blocks of 4 hours. This was not a well-received announcement. Okay, some of you are already probably responding with this being a jerk move on my part. I gotta point out that these folks often had kid stuff to do. School events, doctor appointments, kid missing the bus and so forth. They would need to come in late, leave early and so forth, usually an hour or two here and there. My attitude about this was always, do what you gotta do with your kiddos, let someone know if you'll be gone and just make it up whenever. It was a complete honor system. Didn't write it down, didn't really pay much attention as they were adults, honest, knew what was expected of them, and I trusted them to do the right thing. Needless to say, that PTO thing was my making a point. They quickly decided they didn't need all those demands formally made, and we went back to them going to the post office and such when convenient for them, and coming in late without penalty when needed. I will admit, unfortunately for OP, this kind of reads as like an overall jerk move. Like, oh, you won't do my bidding? Well, then I'm gonna make your life here miserable. Take that PTO off. How much do you got left after using that one up? But in OP's defense, it really is kind of just a give and take kind of thing where, look, I'm willing to turn my head if you're gonna drop your kid off at a doctor's appointment for an hour or two or whatnot and make it up later. But you can't turn around and be like, I don't want to drop something off at the post office on my way back from lunch for you. Like, are we doing each other little favors here or not? Spider Dust commented, had a chick like New Girl from the story get hired at my hospital a few years back. She pitched a fit about us having our reusable water bottles out at the nurses' station, of all things. She said it was unsanitary and that personal items should be kept in our lockers. Now, the nearest drinking fountain to the ER is a solid 5-minute stroll one way through the hall on the other side of the patient or main lobby. I'm sure you see where this is going. It was late May and the weather was in the mid to high 80s Fahrenheit, and the ER was like a swamp. It got to the point patients weren't getting triaged as quickly as they needed to be. The breaking point was when one of the security officers had an episode of syncope from dehydration and fell onto a tray of instruments. This scared the nearby patients and scored him a juicy workers' comp suit since he was a private contractor and not obligated to follow our water rules. Needless to say, policy stickler New Girl quietly decided not to work there anymore about a month later. I'm pretty sure she got some nasty backlash after that episode, but I'm not HR, so not my problem. Our next story is rules are important. I recently started working in a very large packaging facility. Beginning there, I was excited for the opportunities I would have working for such a major company. Early on, I noticed a lot of placating and patronizing things that sent a message of, "You should be grateful you work here." It was overly obnoxious implementation too. Keeping my rosy-colored glasses on, I'm working as hard as I can, despite everyday equipment not working correctly, conveyor belts not running, etc. Now, there are a lot of rules for our safety and the company's. One of the major rules is that if you're not officially trained for it, do not do it, even if a manager tells you to. Recently, they've become draconian with their rules, at least for the lower rung workers, not so much for management if it inconvenienced them. So you are getting coached? Why I'm tattling on you? Frequently. Now, there's a manager that should not have any leadership position whatsoever. He has zero interpersonal communication skills. Anytime he has to talk to you, he's demeaning, condescending, and his voice and body language let you know how inconvenienced he is and can't believe he has to do it. Yesterday I had enough. Cue malicious compliance. I'm packing items into boxes and putting them on the conveyor belt. I run out of a few size of boxes. So, per protocol, I turn on the help light above my station and wait because I need those boxes. Manager, M, comes by. M says, "What's up?" I say I need these boxes. They reply, "Well, do you know where they are? Or you can go get them from another station." I reply, "I was told not to do that." M replies, "What do you mean? You can't go get boxes?" "Okay, I'm asking to go get boxes." I reply to them, "I'm not supposed to leave my station, and that is this person's job that I'm not trained for." M says, "Fine." The look on his face was blank but turning slightly red, and I thought I could see steaming rage coming out of his ears. In a few minutes, I get my boxes, delivered by M, and continue work. Shortly after, I see him showing around the person responsible for stocking our boxes. Not much time passes, and the conveyor belt stops running and it fills up so we can't place packages on them. Before today, I would stack them around my station and keep working or find a manager and find a solution. Our work area is not supposed to be cluttered, and I'm not supposed to leave my station, so I turn the light on and stop working. M says, "Hey, what's going on?" I reply, "I have no place to set my packages." They say, "What do you mean? Put them right here," and points at the floor next to my station. I tell them, "I was told not to put anything on the floor. It's a tripping hazard." M says, "I can't believe... Who told you that? When I worked at X location," stammer. I tell them, "I had 3 trainers on separate occasions and situations tell me this." M stares at me for a solid 3 seconds and looks around that station over there. "Walk over there and stack the packets there. I'll put them on the conveyor belt when I get back." The station is about 50 feet away and I'm on the end nearest it, so I start jamming out, walking packages over. I hear him telling the rest of the station to do the same. In the 15 minutes it takes for the belt to run again, there's at least 75 packages piled up in the other station, all various sizes and weights. Manager walks by and stops dramatically, staring at the dragon's horde before him, mouth open, incredulous. The first package he picks up must have been heavy because he stumbles a little bit picking it up. The only place to put them on the line is right next to me. He proceeds to slam each and every one down on the belt, huffing and puffing. I don't even acknowledge his existence, but inside, laughing my butt off. Honestly, I think the most surprising thing here is OP being so giddy and excited for showing up to what I'm assuming is like an Amazon packaging job. I mean, aren't those kinds of jobs notorious for like working in a mega factory with no AC and you're told if you gotta go to the bathroom, just make sure to find your plastic bottle to pee in? OP's like, "Oh boy, I can't wait to get into this field and move up the ladder." Honestly, with how much OP's sticking to the rules, I hope they live in a place where they have a union. ThinGround5185 commented, "Is this a union job? Cause they can get very riled up by non-union managers taking union work from the floor employees, like loading the boxed packages back onto the conveyor." I know it was more fun watching him struggle and pitch a fit, but it could have been very satisfying after all that to tell him, "You're not allowed to do that." Are any usernames avail commented, "Even without a union, use the policy of requiring training for every task. You seem to be having trouble with those. Have you been trained on properly moving heavy objects?" Our next story is returning my English books. This took place at the end of my senior year of high school. Throughout the school year, we would be given paperback copies of the books we would be reading on the syllabus, i.e. English. We were told to keep them and have them ready to return at the end of the year. My teacher specified that she wanted the books returned to her class in a cardboard box. June finally rolled around, so I gathered all of my books. However, I didn't have any cardboard boxes at home, so I put them in a brown paper grocery bag instead. On the appointed day, I brought the bag of books with me to class to turn in. My teacher refused to accept the books because they were not in a box. Super steamed because I had to lug the books around the whole rest of the day, I complained to my friends about the situation. One of them had a suggestion. That evening, he found me a box that would fit all of my books. Being a photography student, he had access to some super strong photo mounting spray. We sprayed every flap of the box and sealed the books in tight. Once dry, we tested the box and found that, to our satisfaction, we couldn't open the box with our bare hands. I returned the books with a smile the next day. I only regret that I couldn't have been there to see her struggle in vain when it was time for her to check in my books. I mean, it's a good revenge, but unfortunately in this day and age where you get everything packaged by that other OP and sent over from Amazon, most people probably have like a box cutter or something. She probably struggled with it a few times and then just went hacking at the thing. What I would have loved to have seen though, and I know it's not really practical because you need a bunch of boxes, but you kind of do that like Christmas present thing where you put like the smallest box possible, find another box the size up, find another box the size up, make sure she has to go through like 5 layers. I guess to be fair though, with what OP did, you still have plausible deniability with just one box. It's pretty obviously some malicious compliance with multiple. Rex Canis FL commented, "She didn't specify the size of the box. I would have found someone who just bought a refrigerator." But of course, besides that, they're paperbacks and you want to make sure they're not getting damaged, so you should really just pack them in a smaller box inside of a bigger box inside of a bigger box inside of a refrigerator box just to make sure they're not damaged when she's receiving them or she's transporting them. Steampunk Unicorn 01 commented, "My dad did something similar with a Christmas gift of mine one year. He got me an iPod which was in a standard brand box, which he then put into another box, which was put into another box, repeat ad nauseum for about 8 boxes, the final box being big enough to hold a good-sized TV in." Our next story is making a splash with his compliance. Obligatory, not my story, but my father's. My father told me this tale of his childhood. He was a young child at the time, so this would have happened sometime in the early 1940s. He grew up in a farmhouse, and he and his sisters were often shooed outside to play, especially when their mom was busy with chores, such as making dinner. However, the previous few days it had been raining, so she hadn't gotten those breaks, and tempers were flaring a bit. The rain finally let up and she sent them all outside, but there was still an immense puddle almost directly in front of the door. Therefore, she admonished them to stay out of it. Well, my father really wanted to play in that puddle, but he was old enough to have made the connection with what happens when you don't obey mom, so he did what he was told and stayed away from the puddle. Now, I don't know if he'd already figured out his mother's preferred phrases or it was a happy coincidence, but he was planning on the following from the beginning, or so he told me. As the afternoon wore on, he played here, then there, and as he became aware that it was getting close to dinner time, he made sure he was on the opposite side of that puddle from the door. Dinner time came and the mom called the kids in. His sisters went in fairly promptly, avoiding the puddle as requested. He, however, continued to play on the other side, ignoring the call. When she realized he was still playing, she called again, obligatory not real name, "Johnny, come in and wash up for dinner." Nope, no response, just happily playing away. Then she said it, and boy was he ready. "John Michael Smith, you come straight here, right now." And so he did. He ran straight to her, right through that immense puddle that had been calling to him all afternoon. Fallout was a thorough scrubbing of a bath and a cold late dinner, but he still remembers today the joy of that splashing run. I'm gonna be honest, when I was a little kid, I was 100% that kind of kid that wanted to play in puddles. I knew the price to pay was going to be bath time. I didn't care. I'm going in that muddy puddle in the backyard. I was also one of those kids who was terrible with leaving their toys everywhere they go. I might have sentenced a Goku action figure or two to death via muddy puddle drowning in the backyard a time or two in my years. Equivalent Salary 357 commented, "John Michael Smith, you come straight here right now." Change the name, and it would have been my mom's words once she got to the point of using my middle name. Only it would have been the mid-1950s. Toward the late 1950s, our neighbors had a little girl, possibly 3, maybe 4 years old. We had a huge rain, water standing everywhere. Down by the street, it was probably 8 to 10 inches deep. I went outside and was surprised to see the neighbor girl, 3 or 4 years old, stark naked out by the street playing in that puddle. Her mom came running out and snatched her up and carried her back in the house. Later, I heard mom explain to dad that she wanted to go outside, but her mom didn't want her to get her shoes wet. She asked if she could go barefoot. Her mom said yes, so out she went. From what I remember, she had decided to not get her clothes wet either and went barefoot all over. Our next story is Deck Them Halls and Do It Right. I had moved in the previous summer, late July, into a non-HOA community and didn't have any problems with any neighbors until the day after Halloween when someone left a snarky note on my door about not having any holiday decorations up. And if I couldn't even afford a lousy pumpkin on the porch, I was probably too poor to afford living there. Thanksgiving came and went, and I got another nasty little note saying I had better start showing some community spirit or else. Neither note was signed, and the cops just took my statement and said there was nothing they could do. That was my cue for enacting some malicious compliance. I went out and bought some lights and garlands and started putting them up when the neighbors started putting up theirs. Every couple of days I would add a few more until the front of the house was practically covered in glitz and glitter. On Christmas Eve, I added one last piece, switched on all the lights, and left them running until morning. Christmas morning found me waking to the sound of an angry voice and someone pounding on my door. I cracked open the inner door and left the security door locked. Dude objected to my Christmas star having 6 points instead of 5. He launched into a racist, hate-filled tirade against me and anyone displaying a 6-pointed star. Right about then, a cop car pulls up to the curb and 2 uniforms quietly walk up while the idiot continued to rant, with many expletives, racist slurs, and some very violent threats. He must have seen I was smiling at something over his shoulder because he turned around and stopped in mid-rant. There's gotta be fallout, of course. The neighbor was last seen sitting in the back of the patrol car as it pulled away. Yeah, I went downtown and signed the complaint, later sat in on the hearing and had to admit under oath that a 6-pointed star is a legitimate symbol for the season. Dude got a fine and community service. I got to put up the same decorations without hassle for 2 more years before moving out of state. You know, the funny thing is here, I'm assuming he was all upset because it's not like a Christian symbol or whatever. But like, although the 6-pointed star is more famously aligned with other religions, there's still a widely recognizable Christian interpretation of the 6-pointed star. Now, where I would be very surprised is if this guy was actually upset because OP turned Christmas even like remotely religious at all. Jillycat commented, I have this habit of checking dates for the winter holidays. I'm sure I miss some, but go for big ones I know of. While things like Christmas and Yule are set, Hanukkah and Kwanzaa's date ranges change, so I make sure to check every year. I even started throwing in Festivus from Seinfeld because my dad liked the show. December 23rd, if anyone's interested. I started looking at all these dates because of all the war on Christmas, it's not happy holidays, people who just annoyed me. If I can't acknowledge them all in one getting in, I'm going to be pedantic about it. For the record though, my family celebrates Christmas and as a pagan, I acknowledge Yule. But since my family celebrates Christmas, I celebrate and acknowledge it with them. It just bothers me that no one bothers to acknowledge the other holidays unless they're within that religion. If I know someone celebrates a certain holiday, I always try to wish them appropriately, as I wish someone would do for me with Yule, which started my mental calendar. Anyways, I was at Walmart years ago in line behind a crazy lady waiting to check out. The cashier finished ringing up crazy lady and said happy holidays, and the lady went nuts, screaming at this poor cashier that it was Merry Christmas, not happy holidays, and the war on Christmas and so on. She had cashed out already, had her bags, and was just standing there ranting. Poor cashier looked ready to cry. I went ahead and stepped up and had the cashier start ringing my items, which set off the nutbag further because now they were being ignored. Can you not hear me? I'm talking to you, say it right. Something to that effect. Like, lady, people in the parking lot can hear you. I looked at the cashier to try to convey with my eyes that I would totally back her up if she decided to smack the woman half to death with a barcode scanner, and my eye caught the Star of David she was wearing. It happened to be the second day of Hanukkah. I didn't have much, so she had finished ringing me up, and I could tell she didn't want to go through the happy holiday spiel with the lunatic still reeling. so I just smiled at the cashier and said, "Thank you, ma'am. Happy Hanukkah." Psycho lady lost it at me. Why would I say that? It's Christmas, not Hanukkah, blah blah blah. I just waited for her to take a breath and said, "Look, lady, today is, date I don't quite remember. Hanukkah runs from date to date this year. This woman is wearing a Star of David, which means likely her holiday of religion is Hanukkah. Today is not December 25th, so no, it's not Christmas. It is, however, the second day of Hanukkah. I would like to wish you a happy Hanukkah as well, from date to date, and on December 21st, I would like you to have a blessed Yule. On the 23rd, may you have a wonderful Festivus. From date to date, I hope you have a joyous Kwanzaa. Other days, may you have a wonderful holiday season, but lady, on December 25th, I really hope you have a crappy Christmas. You deserve it." It was probably one of the moments I felt proudest of myself. I got followed out of the store by screaming crazy last, but at least she left that poor cashier alone, at least for the time she was following me. I hope she left after following me to my car at least and didn't go back. Our next story is phony business. Background: I was on a family phone plan with my folks well into my adult years. My dad liked to take the lion's share of the data plan and would send out a passive-aggressive "oink oink goes the pig" if anyone but him was using too much data. The rest of us had to connect to Wi-Fi whenever possible. We all had better had a good reason if we got close to using up a quarter of the shared data plan. 4 people on the plan and split 4 ways, but he'd like to take his half out of the middle. The 4 of us paid into the plan each month, and in theory, it was cheaper than an individual plan. Story: for a birthday, he announced that I was getting kicked off the family plan because I needed to be a man or some other grown-up nonsense. I think he may have mentioned something about how he hated that my grown relatives were doing something similar and needed to grow up. The details are fuzzy, but this wasn't the first time, nor the last, that he would announce unpleasant things at birthdays and holiday family gatherings, so I took it in stride and switched to an independent phone plan. I got the cheapest, most basic data plan, and it ended up being comparable to what I was paying into the family plan. I also realized just how little I actually used my data, and the plan was actually fairly comfortable for my needs, so I stuck with it. Fallout: a year later, he brings up the idea of getting me back into the family plan because getting me off the plan ended up not only costing the individual more money per person, the phone carrier also had a deal going on where the more people connected to one plan, the less expensive per person the overall plan would be. Some sort of wholesale or group discount or another. I told him that I was perfectly happy with my independent phone plan, paying my own rate. I also reminded him that the only reason why I got off it to begin with was because he didn't think I was being a responsible grown adult. I simply wanted to prove to him that I can manage all of my own bills like a real adult, unlike others in my family he liked to complain about. He tried asking me a few more times about it throughout the months because it would be so much cheaper for him, but I continually brought up how much he hated my relatives that refused to grow up and that he wanted me to not be like them per his gift on my birthday. I stuck with it because while I could have access to more data that I could use, the absence of snarky texts about being a data hog was more than worth the price. I remember having a pretty similar situation to OP. It wasn't on my birthday, but I remember straight up being told, "Your phone's getting canceled. Good luck. You're on your own." Now, I was more than happy to prove to them that I could afford my own phone, get my own plan, figure it all out. And I did so, but the annoying thing was I lost the phone number that I was using. So imagine every single website you have online where your phone is your backup option. I had to go through and change every single one. Some of them I had to contact support to get it unlocked because the only way to log in was to get the code from the phone number. But darn it, I remember being told you'll never get a phone on your own because I guess they assumed I wasn't making any money or something. They didn't understand what I did because it was all online and out of their view, they thought I was just like lazing around. I mean, it felt great just to be able to prove them wrong. Illuminatus Prime commented, "When the child becomes the adult, the parent becomes the child." Or some such wisdom. Our next story is told to dress up for sleazy functions. When I was 19, I worked at a waterfront bar where sexual harassment was part of the job. KPMG were our neighbors, and the investment jerks were totally entitled. I was waitstaff, which had the added bonus of having to wade through a dance floor with plates only to get grabbed, blocked, and grinded up against. Management would tell us to laugh it off. Then they decided that for functions, female staff would be required to wear black cocktail dresses with heels. Staff pushed back over the heels. It was an OH&S suit waiting to happen given the wet floors and staircases, so management reluctantly dropped that demand, but they were adamant that we had to wear cocktail dresses. I really had no interest in dressing up for the sleazy men that frequented that bar, but for whatever dumb reason I had at 19, I wasn't quitting the job. So I wore a cocktail dress, a black boob tube thing. I also decided it was time to grow out my pits. They never directly confronted me about my new body hair. They just put me out back to cut lemons for drinks all shift every time there was a function on. I would do it happily, hanging out with the kitchen staff in my totally inappropriate strapless dress. Those shifts were the best part of the job. Egads, what is that? Hair sprouting from your pits? Our patrons can't get their kicks from that. Think about the poor people frequenting this bar. You know, I'm just glad OP figured out something that worked for them, that preserved their modesty in some way, and OP didn't have some addendum added onto this post about the manager also trying to be creepy themselves or something. Joshua E commented, I knew 2 women who worked jobs that required black cocktail dresses and a specified minimum of heel. The pretty young things incredibly impressed by your winnings at the local casino and who encouraged you if you lose? That's the job. The job site is also equipped with rather hands-on security if patrons aren't hands-off. Our next story is, wanna go for a walk? It had been a hot summer day, but by this point it was early evening, the temp was going down, and there was a nice breeze. So when my boyfriend asked what we should do this evening, I suggested we go out for a walk. He was a little hesitant, but with some light prodding, he reluctantly agreed. We decided to go to Island Park, not its real name, which is a large city park/wildlife sanctuary that spreads out across 1,200 acres with 30 miles of paths along 9 different loops. It's a popular spot in our town, but large enough to still feel secluded. As we're parking, he's grumbling a bit about how we always go to this park, how far we're going to go out, it's going to be hot, etc. We get about a half a mile out, and he asks me how far we plan to go. I said, I don't know. Would you like to turn back? No, it's fine, he says, and we continue on. I decide to follow his lead, since it sounds like he'll likely want to end the walk before I do, which is fine. We go a little further, and we're starting to reach portions of the park I'm not as familiar with, but my boyfriend used to jog in this park all the time, so he knows the paths better than I do. Does this path loop around, I ask, and he assures me that it does. We continue on for another mile, and we're in a part of the park I didn't even know existed. Well, yeah, he admits. I took you out the long way, so you would regret making me go on this walk. Oh, malicious compliance. If I wanted to go on a walk, he was going to make sure it was a long one. He wanted my feet to hurt and my legs to ache, so I would think twice before asking him to go out in nature again. Let me tell you, this path was beautiful. The trees were tall and luxurious, the views were outstanding, and the birds were singing their hearts out. I couldn't have been happier. Then he got lost, and we ended up walking 4 miles to the parking lot, but it was a great walk and a fun adventure. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go ice my foot while I watch 7 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. Note, no boyfriends or girlfriends were injured in the making of this story. All grumbling and malicious compliance was done in the spirit of good-natured joshing. A mention of Star Trek The Next Generation. You know, I'm gonna be honest, I've never gotten into Star Trek, I've never really watched it, but I've seen my brother over the last year or so watch a lot of Star Trek Enterprise. For anybody that doesn't know, it's a Star Trek show that came out in 2001, and just for fun, I went up to him while he was watching it, and I said, you know, I've never seen Star Trek, I've never watched any of the shows. How blasphemous would it be if I started with watching Star Trek Enterprise? I think he stared at me for a good 30 seconds while he died inside at the thought of somebody starting with Enterprise. You mean you're not gonna start with the Shatnerverse? No, I don't think I will. Our next story is, you don't want kid food? Alright then, enjoy your plate. This happened when I was around 13 and it still cracks me up till date. Every Sunday we had lunch at my grandma's house. She always went all out pot roast, collard greens, spicy gumbo, and whatever else she felt like making, but she also made a separate batch of kid food, usually some mac and cheese, chicken tenders, or grilled cheese sandwiches for the younger cousins who were picky eaters. Now, I was the oldest of the kids, and one day I decided I was too grown for children food. I dramatically pushed away my plate and said, I didn't want kid food anymore. I want what the grown-ups are eating. Grandma gave me this long, slow look over her glasses and asked, "You sure about that, sugar?" I nodded like I was signing a contract with the president. She didn't argue, just scooped a huge portion of her extra spicy gumbo, poured some collard greens with vinegar, added some cornbread on the side, and handed me a big glass of unsweetened iced tea. That gumbo lit my soul on fire. My nose was running, my eyes were watering, and the vinegar from the greens wasn't helping. But my pride wouldn't let me ask for help, and you better believe I wasn't about to admit I missed the mac and cheese. Grandma walked by, patted my shoulder, and whispered, "Next week I'll fix you some chicken nuggets again, unless you'd rather eat like the adults." The nuggets were back in my plate the next Sunday. Look, my hands are up. I don't know what it says about me, but I don't know. I probably would prefer the chicken nuggets and mac and cheese myself. I tolerate it about a scale of white boy spicy, so count me out on the adult food too. Marak Duba commented, "I mean, go grandma." But also, I think educating your palate from a young age is important, so the approach I would have taken is negotiating. Try some richer and stronger food, but have some children's food too while you transition. Of course, OP was a teen, so they might not have been open to debate, and Grandma sure had enough to do, but still. It's a pity OP and Grandma went down the all-or-nothing road. Our next story is, new manager forces me to take lunches, so I do. So the place I work at had mandatory lunch hours we're supposed to take between certain hours based on what hours we're working. I'm an operator, so it's not like I can just walk away from the job if something's going on. My duty is to keep the plant running and make sure nothing bad is happening to the equipment. So after constantly having to call the old manager about missing my clock-ins or clock-outs because I got busy with something, he told me about this survey I could fill out whenever this happened that basically said, I took my lunch, I just didn't clock out for it, and payroll would adjust it accordingly. So, on that note, if you're on an official clocked out lunch as an operator and an alarm goes off or you're interrupted for any reason, you have to clock back in and address the issue, and then either clock out again and retake your entire lunch, or just call a manager or fill out the survey and you're basically paid for your lunch. So, I filled out the survey every single morning, choosing to just skip the whole ordeal of trying to remember my lunches. That's literally what the survey is for. Now, on to the malicious compliance. New manager comes in. A month in, he pulls me aside and says I haven't been clocking out for lunches. I inform him of the survey. He tells me that's only for the occasional missed lunch. I disagree with him. The writing clearly states, I voluntarily chose to skip my meal. He basically orders me to start clocking out for lunch. Sneaky malicious compliance ensues. So for the next 2 weeks, since I have a 2-hour window to take a half-hour lunch, I waited until about the last half hour, and then specifically waited until I see a certain piece of equipment drawing close to a nuisance alarm level, and then clock out for lunch. Somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes later, the alarm goes off. Oops, guess I have to clock back in and go silence that alarm. Oh no, not enough time left to restart my lunch. I did that for 2 weeks straight, forcing the company to pay me for my half-hour interrupted lunches. New manager tried to ignore it until his boss, who was like old manager but got promoted a few years back, comes down to ask me why I stopped filling out the survey. I inform him of new manager's instructions, to which he rolls his eyes and tells me to go back to using the survey. Never heard another word about it. And the cherry on top, we just got all new time clocks a few weeks ago. The survey lingo pops up when we clock out now, instead of just a name and a time, so I still don't have to clock out for lunch. Now I just click OK, agreeing that I took my lunch at some point and I'm good to go. Fist pump. Edit. Alright, let me add some stuff because y'all seem to think I'm giving the company free money. First of all, I'll be honest, a lot of my job is sitting around doing nothing. The plant runs itself for the most part. I'm paid to react to upsets, not sit here and do a task nonstop for 8 hours, so in my opinion, a lot of my time is a break. Second of all, this is a union job. Third of all, I am taking my lunch. I'm just choosing not to clock out for it. My hours remain the same whether I clock out for it or not. The survey just ensures that I don't get paid extra for a missed lunch. If I do legitimately miss my lunch because of an upset, the survey also has the option to say I missed my lunch, and I'll get paid an extra half hour for the day. The new time clocks have the survey embedded in them when we clock out, defaulted to I took my lunch. If I missed my lunch that day, I can change the clock out checkboxes to I missed my lunch, and I'll automatically get paid for them. So basically, no, I'm not working for free. I still take my lunch, and probably take a bit longer than half an hour to cook everything and eat it, but I'm still actively monitoring the system. I feel like the survey thing just kind of makes sense if you're in a job where you can basically sit there and do your job without ever having to get up and go clock out. I mean, if OP can do their job while they're like going back and forth to the microwave or whatever, why even like have the clock out system for lunch? Also, can I just ask, is OP Homer Simpson? Echno Pineapple commented, "You are misunderstanding. Call a manager / fill out the survey and you're basically paid for your lunch." With the survey, OP agrees to take lunches adaptively and still respond to alerts, and doesn't have to worry about tracking it or documenting it, and he will get paid during his lunchtime. If he doesn't take the survey, the company will only pay him for his lunchtime if there was an interruption and he clocked out, clocked in when there was an alert, couldn't take a better lunch, and calls his manager to get it approved every single day. It is a lot of effort for the same benefit he was getting with the survey. Our next story is bias towards seafood and screaming results in a healthy dish of family karma. So, for 7 months, I, the East Asian, non-Vietnamese, lived in a household of 4 disrespectful, dull, mostly narcissistic students in their senior years of getting their bachelor's degrees in similarly dull, undiscussed majors at a local, expensive Christian college in Texas. The primary bond was the food among them, the universal display of cooperation, attention-seeking, or apology-making, depending on the occasion, and so was the group shopping, to which I was never invited at the local American Costco, despite me being old enough to be their grandmother and studying to become a hermitess nun, which I thought would go over well with their Buddhist beliefs. Well, I got consecrated as hermitess sooner than expected, around Christmas time and well before Vietnamese New Year, and no congratulations, but an increased amount of side eyes every now and then, and a distinct presence of people walking away from me and texting on their phones whenever I would begin to start conversation beyond yes or no answers with them. No thank yous when I paid out of my own pocket to hang appropriate holiday decorations that they obviously couldn't afford because they were spending it on liquor and weed on selected weekends. I thought the intermittent visits from the landlady herself from Vietnam would turn things around. It didn't. Different methods were tried for group text and cooperation and friendliness, but no. The majority of the household was heck-bent on existing in its own bubble. Finally, the landlady revealed herself by word and deed as a narcissistic ringleader of the group as spring approached. Final exams were prepared for, and graduation day celebration at the house. All heck broke loose when she suddenly got a notice in the mail that her property taxes had gone up by $1,000, at the same time that she learned her daughter had lost yet another college scholarship for continued education. The daughter's boyfriend was summarily booted out of the house for premarital sleepovers, which resulted in audible sounds of screaming between mom and daughter, usually followed by nights on the phone to Vietnam for the family to coordinate how to sell off the house. But apparently, the scream fests and drama simply weren't enough unless shared with an innocent bystander, and a scapegoat had to be chosen. I was alternately blamed, talked down to, response baited, and then also screamed at in rounds that only the landlady chose, only what she thought my room should look like, only what she thought I should act like, only when she thought I should move out. You move out in 3 days or I call police, when other people couldn't hear her or see her on the kitchen camera. Exhausted, I sadly thought to myself, so you said you were of Asian extraction, right? And now they're trying to test your limits as their own Asian kid. Snap! So A, first order of malicious compliance, meant I kept friendly email communication with the co-owner of the house, the only name that was on the lease anyway, not hers, behind her back as she spun out of control. B, second order of malicious compliance, the landlady talked about calling the police so much that I decided that if I wasn't videoing her verbal attacks, I myself would call the local police to see instead how she would handle the unexpected visit. That was freaking awesome. The police told me that the only answer she knew to all the questions they asked was yes, while nodding her head. So they asked me to tell her daughter, fellow roommate, to say they came to calm her down and do a wellness check on me. This means the humiliation of the narcissistic ringleader as word spreads that mom is unwell and screaming. C. Finally, the third order of malicious compliance was carried out when landlady decided to exact revenge in a different way while still not daring to open her mouth in front of me in private or in public anymore. She soon learned that her son had promised me my deposit money back on the same day I was to move out, which made me very happy indeed. So here's how it went. This was a fish-eating household full of garlic, soy sauce, and all sorts of pickled fish and entrails considered Vietnamese delicacies, but constantly getting into the AC and causing me allergic reactions while I worked remotely for my employer in the confines of my room. The fancy Vietnamese cooking finally came to a halt as graduation day and my moving out day approached. Screaming landlady got bolder and more stressed out and suddenly decided that anything non-fish that I cooked in the oven on Sunday for my weekly meals was to be considered as unhealthy, allergic, and gives me allergies. You must turn off the AC and open all the windows when you cook whatever that is from now on. Okay, crazy copycat. I'm going to do you a healthy dish of Buddhist karma and make sure you enjoy it then, I thought. On my last day of cooking there, I made sure I didn't buy any of my regular foods, only fish. I hadn't cooked in several days, so the entire group of family members and renters had gone out for Mother's Day with the other Vietnamese parents. The AC was on, just barely, with all the whining about the electricity bills dominating household conversations now. Windows closed and living room fan adjacent to the open kitchen operating well. It was so simple to fry up all that fish while they were gone, and I tried all of it. Then wrapped it like I would my regular food, stuck it in the freezer, went to my room, turned my air purifier on, and waited for them to get home with the visiting Vietnamese parents in tow or not. I could hear the coughing, the raising of windows, the comments, the back door to the kitchen being opened, but nobody came a-knocking on my room door to scream at me. And yes, I did get my deposit money back the same day I moved out, with no one daring to talk to me about anything while I loaded up the U-Haul. Now that's how to still enjoy fish while you're allergic to it. So let me get this straight. OP's kind of allergic and has a flare-up with the fish, but they were able to still go and cook it themselves and not burn the whole place down and then just whisk away to their room, turn an air purifier on, and they're A-okay. Bold strategy, but I guess it worked out for OP. Our next story is Stay in Your Lane. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss how we were going to recover from a major problem on the manufacturing line that had reduced production throughput to about 50%. I was not on the production team. I was there to stay informed as the design engineering lead for the project. The problem was software in certain older assembly units and half of the production lines. The best estimate projection from the manufacturing director was that patch, test, and functional confirmation of these units would take a week to 10 days. I suggested that we should contact the manufacturer of the newer functioning units and find out how quickly they could deliver and install replacements for every problem assembler on the lines. Yes, I know, it was a very expensive suggestion. The VP running the meeting simply told me to stay in your lane. You don't know anything about the real work done around here. Having worked elsewhere for nearly a decade in manufacturing prior to transitioning to design engineering and the role at this company, I actually knew all about the real work being done. I also knew that the projection of about 7 to 10 days for a firmware fix for those machines was nothing more than a very deep pile of male bovine excrement. By my rough calculations, it would take at least 3 weeks to complete unit replacement and get the throughput rate back up to a marginally acceptable level. I stayed in my lane. I kept my lips zipped for the remainder of the meeting. I told my director afterwards that the production team had it under control and that I was no longer needed. Following an email discussion thread CC'd to everyone at the meeting and my director that included my ridiculous suggestion and my humble acknowledgement that I really should stay in my lane, I moved on to a new project. 3 weeks later, after multiple failed attempts to update the old assemblers, the work to replace them all with new units began. 3 weeks after that, production was hovering at about 75% and finally reached 95% after an additional 2 weeks. Grapevine, heard but no way to substantiate, The manufacturing director was the scapegoat and was let go. The VP's yearly bonus was impacted due to a $450,000 shortfall in revenue. I continued to stay zip-lipped during all production meetings, discussions, email threads, etc. until I left the company a year later. I stayed in my lane. I can't believe they gave OP the whole, "Listen, Skippy, you're way in over your head here with these suggestions you're making. Come on now, you don't think I know how to do my job? You know, the whole, settle down, kid, maybe in a few years you'll be able to call those shots." Cat and Ninja 82 commented, "What the VP should have said was, thanks for the idea, we'll take it into consideration." Potentially the same underlying message as what he actually said, but more fitting for his title and pay grade. Our next story is, we can name the team? Let's have some fun. I've worked for a big consulting company around 2005, the kind that grinds employees and shatters their morale, underpays and overworks, you know the kind. This one had multiple clients, sectors, and teams. So HR, in their ever-blessing wisdom, thought that it would be a big team-building exercise to create an internal football, soccer, tournament between all the projects that wanted to join. Bear in mind, this was in Argentina. We're passionate about football, that's how you say it in Spanish, probably way too much for our own good, and we love our little get-togethers to play. So multiple teams joined. With people of all categories, it was a good team-building idea. Managers and partners playing side to side with a temp guy who just started. Hey, I mean, crazier things have been organized for the sake of team building. I worked on a project where we were stuck in a cave. The manager was, well, like most of the managers I've met on that kind of companies, they're there because they can lick the boots of the clients better than anyone, and they're really good at being able to work their disposable people to the bone. We wanted to join, and we wanted to have kits made for the tournament, so one of the guys had the idea to ask the manager for money for the kits, and the manager said enthusiastically yes, and gave us the money. But then he said, "I want to play. I want to join the team." And we couldn't say no, so he was in. Then came the last and beautiful question of how to name the team. Manager said, "Oh, I have no idea, whatever you want." So we complied. For the first 4 games until he tore his ACL, manager played rather poorly against colleagues, other managers, and partners, and had to answer the one question he didn't want to be asked. What's the name of your team? Because the team was named the Worn Out Slaves. P.S. We lost the semifinals to the eventual champions, sadly. This story went from like really cool actual like team building exercise with like kits, that's really cool. You know, you stroll out there with your own uniforms until you realize it says, what, the Worn Out Slaves on the uniforms? You can't even like pretend to cheer for your own team just because of how it sounds out loud. Let's go, never mind. Speculatrix commented, "I worked at an office here in the UK where the meeting rooms all had place names. There was no obvious pattern. It turned out some geniuses had named them after mental hospitals. How they got that past the management, I don't know." Our next story is, tank driver tells me he doesn't want to see or hear from me, so he doesn't. Back when I was in the army, my tank driver was someone who you'd really not want to spend time with unless you absolutely had to. Like, for instance, if you were in a tank crew with him and needed the tank to actually get from point A to point B. When it comes to crew breakdown in a tank, it goes like this. Tank gunner, my position, coolest job in the tank. You get to shoot the big gun. You also have to do the least amount of maintenance work on the tank. Loader does most of the bench work in the tank, has to carry and load multiple heavy tank shells, 45 to 50 kilograms each. Not much maintenance work, but spends like 2 to 3 hours cleaning the 3 machine guns. Driver drives the tank, pretty simple, but a good driver will give you a smooth ride. A bad driver will make you feel every dip and bump in the terrain. Does the most maintenance work since they're in charge of the tank tracks and bogies, steel wheels in the tracks. Tank commander knows how to do all the positions, doesn't do any maintenance since they're usually in briefings on maintenance day. A good crew knows how to think alike, doing things together without asking. It helps that you sleep together in the tank, so you all get to know each other pretty intimately. Nothing like peeing in a water bottle to remove any shyness between crew members. When it comes to maintenance, you can either have all the gunners from the platoon get together and work on all the platoon tanks together, same with the drivers and gunners, or each crew can do their own tank. Usually, we prefer the first option because it goes quicker. In this case, my crew was sent to support an infantry exercise on a different base in the middle of the desert on our own. We were simulating a whole tank company, but budget cuts meant only one tank was sent. Sunday, we got to the base and deployed with our tank down into the exercise area. Monday to Wednesday night, we exercised. Thursday morning, the drill ended, and it was maintenance day. Crucial element here is that you don't get to go home for the weekend until your maintenance is complete. The flip side being that you could leave as soon as maintenance was completed and signed off on. The entire exercise, the driver was being a complete butt. I don't know if his girlfriend broke up with him or whatever, but he was even more annoying than usual. Aside from his attitude, his driving was so bad that TC almost broke a rib one time, and I nearly got a black eye when shooting in motion, and he, unintentionally I'm sure, aimed straight for a small ditch. By the time Thursday came around, the loader and I couldn't get rid of him for the weekend quickly enough. But alas, first, maintenance beckoned. One of the tasks the gunner has to do is clean the cannon with an oiled cleaning rod. This is a 3-man job, loader in the tank and 2 people clean it from the outside. It can't be done by one person no matter how strong they are. I asked the driver to help me since the loader was inside the tank. The driver angrily told me he didn't want to hear from me or speak to me. No worries, I found somebody to give me a hand for a few minutes and we got the job done. I completed the rest of my maintenance work pretty quickly. Like I said, not much actually, with the help of the loader, and then I gave him a hand cleaning the machine guns. The 2 of us were done before lunchtime, just waiting for the tank commander to sign off on our work so we could start our weekend early. Driver, on the other hand, realized that he didn't have any other drivers to help him maintain the tracks. Tension, tightening bolts, greasing ports, etc., and he had told us to freak off. He was still working on the tank when it got dark and was told to stop for safety reasons. He had to continue the job on Friday morning and missed out on a day of leave. I want to say that his attitude changed on Sunday when we got back to base, but you know it didn't. Thankfully, after about 2 more months of his nonsense, he was transferred out. I have no idea where he is today. I'm still good friends with the loader and tank commander. The driver can get bent. I would really love to find out if they got transferred out because it's clear they weren't working with whatever unit they were assigned with, or if it was just like a reassignment thing. I mean, to be fair, somebody who can operate and drive the tank, I could imagine them getting shifted around pretty easily. The Alphabet commented, "I don't get the budget things with the military. The conscripts are already there. I assume mandatory military service. I don't think the diesel used for moving the tank would be too expensive. I suppose the ammo and shells could be expensive, but why moving a tank would mean a significant expense? Why is it a budget concern? I've never been to the military." Direct Cabinet 4564 commented, "Maintenance can be a big deal. Tracks only last so many miles. The engines are often pushed pretty hard since tanks obviously weigh a lot, so this can cause more maintenance headaches. You also can't just drive them around on the road since the tracks can destroy the road. So then you need to transport them to other bases by train or using a semi with a special trailer." Our next story is, paperwork not good enough the first time? No problem, we'll do it again, but you're paying. Years ago, I worked in an isolated location, all energy industry related. Due to the extent of the isolation, the client company had its own medical facilities, one of which I worked in. So one contract company had a thing about needing excessive paperwork for their guys who were sick. See, the medical care was a line item in the client company budget, so nobody saw a bill. This made for a system that was easily abused, what with no financial dog in the fight. So this one company's guys would come in periodically, appropriately sick. They weren't burning time, they only made money on duty, so they wanted to work. We would see them and often give a day or 2 of bed rest before returning to work. Everyone there was typically on a 2-week tour of duty due to logistics, so a day or 2 like this wasn't uncommon or unreasonable. Patient would be seen, given a note for the boss, go get some rest and take your meds. But that wasn't good enough, maybe for every other contractor, but no, this contractor was special. So even though they'd been seen by qualified medical staff and given prescriptions and a note on when they could return to work, this company wanted them evaluated again and another note saying they could actually go back on duty even if it was 24 to 12 hours since the first visit. Remember, no cost, so what do they care, right? This didn't sit well with us. We had long hours and busy days, often 18 to 24 hours awake and on duty, with a 2-week tour of duty, and this was BS paperwork and time wasting because someone felt like it, not because it was medically necessary. If we had seen the patient and given you a note on when they can go back on duty, my due diligence was done. So we decided, after a couple of months of this pattern, to accommodate them on our terms. Guys would come in ready and willing to go back to work, but still needing another note because apparently the first one wasn't nearly good enough and the boss said so they would get one on our terms. After, we'd see all of the morning sick call patients. After our scheduled morning appointments, they would be on the clock until we saw them again sitting in our waiting room on the clock and drinking coffee, which was typically around 3 hours after the clinic opened. Each and every one of them, which was typically 2 to 3 guys, every day. They were a big contractor. They were surprisingly slow to pick up on it. Took about a month of this approach, and once they put it all together, they were ticked. Clearly, we were wasting their time and ours. What did that matter? We were on duty, and the care was free, so freak our opinion. But our bosses backed us 100%, essentially saying, if you went to your doctor and paid for a visit, would you pay again to be told the same thing the next day? After that, the paperwork from the medical staff was honored the first time, and everyone's workdays were more efficient. So I just don't understand the logic of, yeah, no, this doctor's note that you have very legitimately provided for us, we just don't accept that. Go get another one. Is that productive or effective for anybody? Are You an Oak Man commented, I'm confused. One of the contractor companies arbitrarily decided to require a secondary note, which is definitely BS for all the reasons already explained. So how are the guys on the clock if they needed the secondary note to go back to work? Also, having been a worker at a facility that also had sick call, how else were you supposed to give them their second notes? You take care of sick call and then do appointments and then deal with other issues that pop up. Unless I'm missing something, doing it that way is the only way that makes sense. What were you doing before? OP responded, they got a note to go back to work, typically the next day, at the first visit. The second was a time waste requiring us to have another visit that accomplished nothing, do a chart note for medical legal reasons, and give them another return to work note, which was no different than the prior, all because of someone who had no financial nor time use dog in the fight. My boss's comment is the point. If you paid to see your doctor and he gave you a note to go back to work the next day, would you see them again the next day to pay for another one with the same instructions? Our next story is, you have to stay till 6 p.m. So about 10 years ago now, I worked the fly-in, fly-out lifestyle, and it was great. We would work 8 days on and get 6 days off. On the days we worked, it would be 12-hour shifts, and ours was 6 a.m. till 6 p.m. Anyway, we got this manager and they were good at first, but over time they became more strict. One day we were leaving at 5:55 p.m., which was very common for us as we carpooled from camp to site, about 5 kilometers away in our work vehicle, even with the boss. We would leave camp at 5:30 a.m. and be at work shortly after, usually commencing at 5:40 a.m. most days, if not earlier. So one day after leaving 5 minutes early, we were pulled into the office and told that we had to stay until 6 p.m. moving forward, even after we mentioned that we mostly ate at our desk instead of going to the lunchroom. Cue malicious compliance. The boss would get to the car at the normal time, 5:30 a.m., and we wouldn't get to the car until 5:50, even 5:55 a.m. at times. We stopped eating at our desks and took our 2 breaks away from work in the lunchroom. If disturbed, we would ignore it or say that we would get to it after lunch, and we stayed until 6 p.m. even if work was completed. Some urgent tasks that were normally done while most people were on breaks stopped getting done or took longer. Sometimes the work carried over to the next day. Their manager caught on about 3 weeks later and asked us why. We explained what had happened. That afternoon, we were informed that we could leave 5 minutes early moving forward as long as the work was done. Let's just say the manager only lasted another 6 months. Not sure if they were forced out or quit. Hey, at least somebody in a leadership position actually stepped in and did the right thing here. I mean, if anything, I'm honestly surprised it didn't go on for even longer than OP described. Our next story is, boss said no working from home, so I came in sick as requested. Last week, I woke up feeling awful, fever, cough, the whole thing. I messaged my boss to ask if I could work from home so I wouldn't get anyone sick. He replied, "No exceptions. If you're well enough to work, you're well enough to be here." So I dragged myself in, coughing and sniffing the whole time. The look on his face when I walked through the door was priceless. By the end of the day, he told me to go home and said I could work remotely after all. Funny how that works. What did they think? OP was just trying to get an easy, comfy day of lounging around in their boxers, doing their work from home. They probably thought OP was just gonna try to be at home with sunglasses on, super hungover or something. If you can work from home, you can dodge a ball, or something like that. Mysterious Cat 33 commented, "My manager wouldn't let me work remote because I wasn't contagious, just severe allergies." She then complained during my one-on-one that I needed to control my coughing and sneezing because people were complaining. I took Clorox wipes with me everywhere so people would know I'm serious about possible germs and not sick or trying to get anyone sick, but my manager complained when I took sick time and wouldn't let me work remote, so I didn't have much choice as I was on the maximum dose for Benadryl, and it took 2 months for the allergies to get better. Guess who now has a fully remote job in another department? Some managers suck. I'm so sorry you also work for someone without a functioning brain. Angry Sunbird commented, "I took almost all my holiday as sick leave the year I was finally diagnosed with celiacs. My boss was cool, but very soon after diagnosis, I had a boss change, and that new boss was convinced I was a malingerer. I had to quit to get away from her." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.